Okay, check this out. King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table by Doris Ashley, illustrated by Arthur A. Dixon. Now, I saw this at an antiques fair recently and I couldn't resist it. Beautiful hardback. Has some strange quality of being like a totem. I wasn't sure what this book was. I realized that this was a children's book from the 1920s. I wasn't sure if this was something well known or not, but it seems to just be like a deluxe, like perhaps like a deluxe Christmas present for the 1920s child. Because it was inscribed Christmas 1927 to Mary Marjorie Bird with love from her godmother Aunt Mary. Christmas 1927. In those days, I believe everybody was called Mary. It's quite thick paper. And it has these beautiful color pages that sort of caught my attention. The youth pulled it out easily from how Arthur began to reign. So beautifully produced. It's like glossy. What really struck me, how this is like a lost piece of organic technology. The print feels like it's been struck by a machine. The paper feels like it's come very recently from a living tree, long before our digital era. I mean, look at the size of this and the weight of it. And it's funny because it is almost like, you know, like you're holding a tablet. It's that kind of size. But this technology is just a single bound album of information, knowledge, mythology, a narrative about King Arthur. And by making it like this deluxe consumer product and giving it to a child, it's like saying this is something important and something to be treasured, because you can have a tablet the same size as this, which allows you to stream near infinite amount of music or video, or download a free PDF of any book. But this is just one single story. And for the child in 1927 to have that, it's like being given an invitation to this hero's journey, for them to see themselves in all these archetypal characters. It's something so solid, so real in this world. Like the weight of this. I mean, if you got this as a present, be very handy to hit your brother over the head with it on Christmas Day when he was too annoying. And then when you grew up and you were going to college, then you'd a little spliff on here, roll it up. Because I was thinking about this, that if this edition was for a child's Christmas present in 1927, that by the time you got to the 60s, this was undoubtedly owned by Brian Jones, and he'd probably look at this while eating copious amounts of small pieces of paper. Then I believe went to maybe one of his children, and then probably went to the home of Donovan. And just recently Donovan was probably clearing some stuff out of the attic or whatever, so this went into the antiques fair. But I'm only mentioning that because those are the details I would be adding to an eBay listing if I was selling it, but which I'm not. The coarseness of the paper is really interesting, but you can feel the indentation of the letters that have printed through. You can actually feel. I was thinking how much a physical object like this given to a child is an entire learning experience in itself. Because what we give them now is information through technology, and digital technology is something dead to us. It's removing the information into something purely abstract, removing the experience that allows us to process all the correspondences of this reality of us being a consciousness interacting with matter in a physical world. And you see how more and more direct experience is robbed from the generation of children now. Because just leafing through this, you can understand that this is paper come from a living organic system, that these are hand drawings. This is something handmade, that a person drew this, and it encourages the child to think that they could draw something similar in their own style. While a CGI image is so plastic and designed in a sort of smoothness. I mean, a drawing like that is so well done of the bishop's cloak. The hand drawing suggests so much detail. And they're just squiggles. You can look at this and in a way, in just looking, you're learning and understanding how you could draw something. Then another beautiful colour print, the strangest beast that had ever been seen from the night of the fountain. I think you can see that they're like line drawings and then watercolour paint, I think, on a sort of glossy paper. It's interesting even to me that the technology was there in the 1920s to do that, like, and it gives such a luxurious feel. That's what I'm thinking, like with a child looking at a book like this, by feeling the coarseness of the paper with ink printed on it, and just by the child touching the glossy colour print, just by the act of interacting, holding it and leafing through, you're learning to differentiate qualities and textures and possibilities, and something from the mind gone into the physical world and then captured as an object. Many a contest did King Arthur win with his good sword Excalibur, and most carefully did he treasure the scabbard. For Merlin ever warned the king to have it in safe keeping, since it had the power of preserving him from deadly hurt. Had the old magician been always by Arthur's side to aid him with wise counsel, doubtless the king would have escaped many a grievous peril. But wise as Merlin was, his skill did not avail to avert his own doom, which was close at hand. Now I could read through this, the entire book, or do a series of videos reading each chapter. I have to turn that off. I could do every chapter and read through it, as I think that this is most likely out of copyright. But you would have to pay me. I was looking at this picture. Vivian enclosed him living within a magic circle. This is interesting bit of detail for the child to read. By this time, Vivian had grown weary of Merlin and wished to be rid of him, so she strove to persuade him to reveal to her a wondrous charm that he knew, by means of which anyone could be imprisoned without walls in any place and could not release himself. For a long time Merlin would not teach her the secret, because he knew the witch would use his arts against himself. But at length she prevailed on him. Then one day he showed Vivian a great rock wrought by enchantment, and she begged him to raise it and go beneath it. And when he had done so, she made use of the charm she had learned from Merlin himself, and enclosed him, living within a magic circle she had drawn, so that he could not move. Thus Merlin's prophecy concerning himself was fulfilled, and he was seen no more upon the face of the earth. So if you were wondering what happened, that's what happened. And then as well, you can attempt to put your little brother or sister inside a magic circle. It's a good tip. I don't know if I'm giving some spoilers away. The treachery of Morgan Le Fay. There appeared before me a dwarf. beautiful colours and not the purple. I think there's something in that, and just making the aesthetic of beauty something possible, that something exists, and something that's crafted and artful, and to think of this sort of mythological story of a child reading this 1927. You know, it's nearly 100 years ago, and 100 years ago they were still looking to a mythological past for inspiration and for childhood stories. It's not a story of the Industrial Revolution or the First World War or the sniffles 1918 or whatever. It's going back to a sort of imagined past. And there's, I think, so much freedom in that, you know. I've really even, like, how similar this is to a child watching Star Wars in 1977, and, you know, this is 50 years earlier. It's a funny thing, you know, the Tristram and Isolde story here as well. Because when we hear the name Tristram now, we think of them either working for the BBC or for, I don't know, you know, Extinction Rebellion or something like that. And not a name you ever hear in Ireland. It's funny that, you know, Ireland, there now a chance at this time that King Anguish of Ireland sent to King Mark of Cornwall, demanding the tribute which had been paid to him in former times by the land of Cornwall. Being unwilling to obey the command, King Mark summoned his knights and barons to a council, and by their advice he sent answer to the King of Ireland that no tribute would he pay, and that if he would have aught from the land of Cornwall, he must send a worthy knight to fight for it. Cornwall is a place I'd like to go to. It's like the surviving Celtic peoples of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and what they have in common. The Queen, seizing his arms, pulled the goblet from his lips. I find the expressions are so funny. She's quite determined, and she's actually spilling the goblet. And you wonder, what did they do in those times? Well, he's repairing a mandolin there, and he's sitting about drinking. Let's have a look at another colour plate. Sir Tristram gave her a ring. There's such elegance in that, isn't it? You know, do you want to give children an image of a more elegant and considered world, or do you want them to enjoy a more coarse and degraded and vulgar world of entertainment and distraction? It seems like nowadays, if you had young children, it's like anything, it's really up to you if you want to show them like a classic film or a 1940s Disney movies, you know, like Fantasia, giving a nice introduction to some classical music, or people become lost in keeping up to date with things that should never be incorporated into your life in the first place. So when the child is brought to the latest CGI films, it becomes harder for them to return to the original organic analog intentions. I mean, it's the same thing when you don't have children. You sort of imagine I'd be bringing them up like good little Amish children with no horrible contemporary Hollywood for them. He severed the cords by which Bragwain was bound. She's giving quite a coquettish glance to her unbinding. You wouldn't be surprised if they went on a date. This is great as well. The clash of weapons brought Isolde to the walls. So funny, she's like peeking over. This is why you never want to get involved in other people's domestic disputes, let them bash it out, I mean, she's just watching, with all due rights, Sir Palamedes was baptized. I'll have to read this. I should really read through this properly and avoid watching any Christmas TV. But the images are so strong, it's suggesting like a tradition of chivalry and knighthood and the sort of this romantic view of a medieval period. The original King Arthur may have been just after the Roman era or in parallel with the end of the Roman era. But we have these very, I suppose, kind of stylized idea of medieval knights and silver armor, and how much of it sort of blends the Christian story of the Holy Grail with sort of pagan connection to the land and the nature and a living landscape, which is very much part of John Borman's Excalibur. One of the two knights rushed to encounter him. It's so great. I mean, even, like reading comic books with those kind of images of action and all those like war stories and World War II comics and stuff. It does so much, like now you could have this as a tablet you look at and you'd flick through the pages and then you'd be reading this and then you get to the action scene and I don't know, you'd press this and then this would become an animated action sequence that you could watch or interact with or put on goggles, and then this will go to them being projected out to watch it. But just as a beautiful hand-drawn image, it leaves so much space for our own imagination to imagine this battle sequence with just the suggestion of movement, and for us to complete it. It's all, it's also human. You can imagine drawing this image. You can imagine reading this version of the story and taking those characters and writing your own story, and look at her expression. She doesn't want to know. Because one of the things when I was looking at that, it was funny that this was dedicated to a child as Mary, and you were thinking, oh, wouldn't this be for boys with the story of King Arthur and the adventures? But it has that strong romantic element, and I realised looking at it that it's a good story for girls as well, because it gives that sort of idealised romance from the female point of view and their position in this world, and damsels in distress to be rescued. And I suppose it's like initiating you into your own running fantasies of a knight and damsel. Lynette caught him by the arm and implored him to wait. I implore you to wait, kind sir. I implore you. More than my job's worth, but I implore you. Some of that you can really feel the texture of the print. Again, it's like another correspondence for the child, and just feeling that of understanding how it was made. You can see on some of these pages the letters come through, making you imagine that this is some much older and more valuable manuscript than it is. Lancelot loved Guinevere from the moment he first beheld her. It's literally behelding. This is the moment of behelding. It's funny, thinking how much of a treasure this would be to a child. I guess, the physical weight makes you feel like, oh, this is something valuable and worthy, and but having the colour prints and then the black and white prints, it almost encourages you to want to colour that in. And it's funny to think that it would be the best behaved child that wouldn't dream of doing such a thing, but you can imagine the sort of trigger that, oh, wouldn't it be nice to colour in the flowers and trees? I mean, this is sort of one of those things where, people talk about like upcycling, or, you could take out all the colour plates into little frames, but as an object, an art object itself, it has a value. I mean, even the thing as well with the paper on that, you could imagine writing in or drawing in your own things. Which would be defacing it, but it's the sense of something being interactive. Let's have a look again. I ask your promise to release my father. Lovely colours on the clothes there. But I wonder why they chose that one as a colour print on some of the others. They just see that as a key part of the story. I mean, it's interesting when something is broken down into its most fundamental parts like this, and this like child's version of all the mythology. A few years ago, I was reading a book by Jung's wife, which was about all the archetypal stories and energies present in the different Holy Grail and King Arthur stories, and I believe that was only published after she died in the 1950s. And it's like anything, how anything you investigate goes into more and more detail, how everything exists at a surface level, and then how you zoom in and more and more and more and more information becomes aware or revealed. Well, I think if everything is presented as being an equal piece of digital information, it's much harder to push through into it. I mean, at its most basic level, it just makes you think how superior it is as a learning tool to give a child an organic book made from wood. While what children are learning by using phones and computers so early now is acclimatizing them to a very cold digital system, because a child can imagine that this is something they could create. They know it's something that you can interact with, and to get the most out of it, you have to give it your attention and sit down and read the story. Because on the first level, you can just look through at the imagery and get a sense of the story. But then you have to give it your attention to fully understand it. But giving a child a phone or a laptop or a tablet, you can't imagine how those technological components were created, except it comes from a very distant corporation, and how it flattens all information into being of the same value, and how hard it is to give your attention to a text, a video, a piece of music, when there's always something else to look at if it doesn't immediately grab you, which reinforces a kind of attention deficit disorder in the actual physicality of the brain, of where well-trodden paths are laid down without any surprises. The holy vessel appeared in their midst. I mean, there's so many layers to this, of the interaction between Christianity and the pagan world of Britain and Ireland, and the story. I think this mentions the story of yes, know ye that I am Joseph of Arimathea, and I come hither to show you the perfect vision of the Holy Grail, which was that idea that Joseph of Arimathea, I think, had cut down. He was there after the death and resurrection of Christ, and had brought the Holy Grail to Glastonbury as this source of power. And I mean, it's funny as well thinking that this is the 1920s, and just a few years later, you had the occult members of the particular German political organization going around to places like Glastonbury and Tibet and wherever, trying to understand what was the reality of myth and history of distant origins and higher civilizations and lost powers and potentials of the human being, and those powers that they could wish to control. Because they always used to love showing the Indiana Jones films at Christmas, and they're like a very Jewish Hollywood version of these stories retold and as a form of like pulp fiction. Sir Lancelot and the Queen talked sadly together. And you think how valuable a book would have been then, and like the nursemaids working on a tapestry or something, giving a sense of like a totally different world. This kind of gets into some spoilers, and I was thinking in giving the very end of this how much it reminds me of watching John Boorman's Excalibur, which I think is also an excellent an excellent kind of film to watch at Christmas. That's a bit of a spoiler for Excalibur if you watch it. Like, what's so extraordinary in Excalibur is you're seeing it filmed in the real world locations around Wicklow in Ireland. Some of those places I know so well. And when you walk through that landscape, the landscape you see in that film, with those valleys and forests, you feel there are so many stories, forgotten stories, hidden stories, stories of psychic geography, of all the people who have walked through these places. The Round Towers and Saint Kevin and the monster in the lake, and what I love in Excalibur is seeing the natural world with the mythology written back into it. When you watch Lord of the Rings, I find it so much like a video game in its action sequences and sort of CGI buildings and cities. I can't get into Lord of the Rings at all. I always wish that that had it been made in the 80s and looked something like Excalibur or like Dragon Slayer or Conan the Barbarian, because I find they're all very powerful archetypal stories. Well, there's a total unreality to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and their computer imagery, where you see a really negative influence from video games has sort of interacted, where the influence between video games on film and film on video games have kind of been turned into this kind of melange of blandness. But you can see what else they were advertising as they fairy tales, Hans Andersen, Grimm's, Aesop's fables, glorious battles, children's stories from Tennyson, from Shakespeare, Italian fairy tales, Japanese fairy tales, Russian fairy tales, Indian legends, French fairy tales, Northern legends. I think that's such a funny image there. As I said, there's not a lot of stories here about stories for children about the Industrial Revolution or the First World War, is there? Alice in Wonderland, Longfellow, Dickens, the Arabian Nights. All these things we think of classics, from the last few hundred years, and I wonder how much of that is alive now, except in their sort of Disney-fied perversion. But here is this object, this art object, and the amount of room it takes in your little pod plugged into the mainframe. Just to hold that feels like a magical object. Alive with some potential, and it's like, do you accept this invitation? It's like the weight of history itself. It's like a trigger in this like akashic reality we find ourselves in as we're drawn further and further unwittingly into a simulacrum of information, and information being layered over everything in our organic reality. And somehow this object is vastly underrated as a magical talisman, as an invitation, as the weight of history and mythology, the value to it. I mean, this is human art for the human soul, for a long winter's night, to read about the possibilities that may arise as the sun returns and we begin again. And enjoy a Merry Christmas for everyone.